you'll need the software developers to be able to use the AI. It still is like miles away from getting to a point where it can replace mid, even like junior like level developers, in my opinion.
You went to FosDem recently. I hadn't heard of it until you mentioned.
Okay.
What is FosDem? What was interesting about it?
Yeah, so FosDem is a very large open source software development conference. It's held in Brussels, which is in Belgium, which is in Europe, for anyone who doesn't know. It's been going for something like, I think this might have been the 25th year this year. So it's basically, it's completely free to attend. There's no tickets. There's no, like, you don't have to register or anything like that. You literally just turn up. It's held in like a university campus in Brussels. And it's super fun. Like, it's super fun because it's not vendor driven. So you go to like most conferences. I'm sure you've been to a few conferences yourself, and it's, there's, that while there's good and it's a good chance to network, there's often like a bit of an agenda that the vendors are trying to sell you stuff, of course, because they've paid for the conference, etc. But with FosDem, it's really just like a big gathering of software developers, and because the emphasis is on open source software, it's what I would call some of the most passionate and enthusiastic developers that are out there. So you'll get a lot of talks on, say, security, on decentralization, on like being the importance of like owning your own tech and, not necessarily using some of the big giants, so to speak. So there's loads of bits on that, but then the real emphasis is on open source software. So it should be, all of the software there should be free to use, accessible to everyone. And it was interesting, like going there, because it was around about the sort of time, I think it was not quite, but just close to when DeepSeek came out. And then with the impact of DeepSeek on AI, with, everything being so closed, open AI and, everything that they've been doing. And then DeepSeek coming out, like DeepSeek was such, at the time anyway, a victory for open source, and it just kind of reminded everyone what the importance of having open source kind of is. So yeah, like that was interesting. Like that was a lot of discussion there. But like FosDem itself, it's really, as with a lot of conferences, like, the talks are interesting and it's good, but it's really like getting a chance to just network with people. So there's a lot of opportunities to just sit around in cafes, talk about different development things, learn about new concepts, see what people are working on. It's really well attended by, I tend to go with, there's a few like engineers from Meta that I'm friends with that I tend to go with, but we meet up again with a lot of other engineers working in all sorts of different backgrounds, some in big tech, some in startups, some, just pure indie devs. And it's just like, yeah, it's probably the most diverse background of people that you could possibly imagine. And it's just such a great atmosphere and friendly, and great chance to have a few nice Belgian beers and socialise with people. And yeah, it's just a ton of fun whilst being
Cool,
educational.
sounds like a lot of fun. So very interesting, actually, wasn't it, when DeepSeek came out and the open source element that pushed OpenAI to start talking about actually embracing a bit of open source themselves, and be interesting to see if that happens.
It really did, yeah. Sam Altman came out, even I think a few days after, and says we don't want to be on the wrong side of history when it comes to open source. And I think it even made them bring out their O3 mini model a bit earlier as well. And it was just so interesting because it's like, you kind of believe, hey, this is, like it has to be done this way, but DeepSeek kind of showed that no, it actually could be a lot cheaper. It could be done like this. So obviously there's a lot of other controversy about, where that data is stored and where it's run locally, etc. But yeah, no, it's just relating to like the open source stuff. I think it was a real reminder of me of, I don't know, everything I think that's good in software is open source, like that's come from that. It at least started out as that, like it's, you have that collaboration, it's accessible to everyone. That is where truly great software always comes from. I think when it's closed off, you're always going to be then restricting it to only a select few, and there's only, you're not going to get so much in the way of contributions and development essentially like done when it's in that background. But then, of course, I mean, it's hard to balance that with like how do you make money as an open source? Like, everyone at the end of the day, like this is our profession. Like people need to get paid, so it's like balancing having open source projects with actually being able to earn salary is an interesting, I guess, conversation.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and it was quite a hot topic. Probably about 10 years ago, wasn't it? When I think Red Hat was the first business that was going to form a $1 billion business around open source.
Yeah.
At least the first. Actually, that's not true, is it? Because MySQL, however you pronounce it, they started, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, is it? Yeah.
That was open source, also fully remote, back before everyone talked about remote, back in the days of dial-up modems.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were one of the first companies that was open source that sold for over $1 billion.
Yeah,
To
wow.
Sun
Yeah.
Microsystems back in 2009, I think. So yeah, it's that interesting challenge, obviously. It's how do you build open source? How do you make money from it? And Red Hat did that with services and contracts. I think MySQL did the same with enterprise licenses. Obviously, Redis and Terraform, which is HashiCorp, and Elasticsearch have all been facing some challenges with that recently and trying to struggle through that balance and not alienating the community, but trying to find a way to revenue.
It's very hard. It's very hard. I think particularly when you start out as an open source and then you try to transition into being like an enterprise or being closed, like it's a real tight rope, to walk for companies. Like, because I mean, I've worked with quite a few vendors that start as open source, but they are at the end of the day companies that behind them and need to make money. So, I mean, like, I use like an open source. Well, I use a performance test tool like called Gatling, which started as open source, but then has transitioned to more enterprise. But they tried to keep the open source element, but at the same time, balancing that out with making money. Like Karate Labs, which is another test automation framework as well. Again, they have their own paid offerings, like with enterprise. I think a common way that people try to make money with it is, with support and bits and pieces like that. That's like one of the most common paths. But again, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult line to tread. One way that I have seen it done really well is that I use a documentation portal for MK Docs. So MK Docs is like a big doc static site generator for documentation, and then there's a theme on top of it. It's more than a theme; like it's more of a whole plugin ecosystem called Material for MK Docs, and they've got a very interesting model because it's an open source model, but they have sponsorship for like certain numbers of features. And what he does is like it's very clever. It's that he lists the features that are available to the sponsors. And then once he gets sponsorship up to a certain level, so there's certain levels like $2,000 a month, $4,000, $6,000, etc. As he gets up to certain levels, he then releases those features to everyone. And it's for him, it's worked really well. Like he's had individual sponsors and corporate sponsors, and he's been able to grow this like open source platform, but at the same time be able to like actually monetize it as well. And he doesn't seem to have upset many people like by doing it. People that have donated have been happy to donate. People have been happy to wait for features to come a little bit further down the line. It's just a really interesting example of one way of successfully monetizing open source. That's worked well in that case. But yeah, it's quite a difficult subject to broach.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I guess that's, by the sound you say it sounds like one person doing it rather than trying to build.
I think he's grown it into a slight team now, but I think he started as an individual and then slowly hired like a small team, I think, to help support around that. But yeah, no, it's very interesting what they've done.
Cool. That sounds very interesting. I'm going to check that out afterwards and dig into that.
Yeah.
So we touched on a couple of things there, apart from OS licenses. You also mentioned AI. So the hot topic at the moment about AI is going to replace software engineers, is it or isn't? I sit firmly in the camp that I've been hearing this for the last 36 years. And I'm sure people were talking about it back before I started. AI has been around since the 50s, 60s, depending on what you want to count.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Where do you stand?
Very good question. So I put out a video, I think like a month or so ago, about the developer job market 2025. And the comments on it like have been absolutely insane. Like, so my point of view is the same as yours, is that it's obviously an incredibly useful tool and it's powerful, but it won't replace software engineers, but it will change, it changes the game like quite significantly. My view is that you have to use it. Like if you refuse to use it for some reason, like you will struggle, like you will be left behind. Like it is so insanely advanced. But it's all very well using AI to create like boilerplate code or get started on a project quickly. But for actually using it for when you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, it won't end well. Like you still need to understand basic software engineering, basic system architecture. You need to understand what you're prompting it for, basically. Like I'm building out a new course at the moment, and as part of that, I built out a complete full stack application. And it's interesting because it's something that I wouldn't have had the confidence to have done beforehand. I know that I could have done it, but I know it would have taken me so long to figure out all of the different things, how to deploy the back end, the front end, how to get them to talk to each other, how to deploy it to production, how to add authentication, etc., etc. But with AI, it gives you that kind of confidence to try it out. But it's only as I've been prompting it and writing different bits and pieces, I can tell straight away when something isn't going to work. And that's only from having some experience from, being in software engineering for 20 or so years. I kind of think like if I just gave it to my son, for example, and asked him to do the same thing, I know, again, he could get so far, but you'll only get to a point where you can build something like very basic. And then when something goes wrong or you need to change something or you need to update something, then, you're going to get stuck with it. So in short, like I think it's useful to use, but you still need to learn the fundamentals. But it's really interesting, like the comments on my video, I don't know if it's just YouTube comments or bits like that, but like there's so much, like the fear out there is unbelievable amongst developers. Like people are very, very vocal on both sides of the argument about how everything is like finished for developers. You're going to have like Salesforce saying they're going to get rid of all their developers and they're just going to rely on AI. Like, I just can't see how it's going to work. I just can't see how it's going to work. Not in the long term. Like it will make people maybe more efficient and like it will definitely change things, but there's still going to be a huge demand for software developers. More so, I think, if anything, like over time, like you'll need the software developers to be able to use the AI. Like it still is like miles away from getting to a point where it can replace even like junior like level developers, in my opinion. But it's a very polarizing topic at the moment.
So I agree with you, but I'm coming at it more from a different angle. My perspective has always been that writing code is a very small part of being a software engineer.
Absolutely.
And in many ways, it's the easiest bit, because if I put in whatever programming language 2 plus 2, the compiler does the code and it spits out, and I'm going to get 4 every time. It's predictable, It's deterministic.
Yeah.
The hard bit has always been somebody saying, can you just add this feature? Okay, but what do you mean by that? What do you want that feature to do? And it's that back and forth with another human. And until we get good at writing requirements, product owner, product manager, business person is not going to be able to just go to AI and cut out the software engineer. Because I don't know about you, but most of my career has been spent going, okay, yeah, great, can build that. Yeah. What exactly do you want it to do? What about this case? What about this condition? What about these conditions?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. We've gone away. We've built half of this. But now as we're doing this, we realise that there's this extra condition. Yeah. What would you like to do? It's all that back and forth and trying to get those requirements. And one of the reasons I loved Agile is I worked for a while in building software for things like the railway industry.
Okay.
And there you have to plan out everything in advance because it's a safety critical system.
Yeah.
And you spend months, if not years, capturing the requirements. And it's hard. And you realize how hard it is for what, in that case, is a fairly small and deterministic system.
Yeah.
Because, you've got a train, it goes forward or backwards, that's it. It's fairly constrained, but there's still so many requirements, there's so many permutations. Yeah. So you think about more modern complex software these days, there's so much work that it isn't coding, that is hard.
Exactly.
And I think that bit is not going away. In fact, it becomes even more important if you're going to try and tell an LLM and prompt
I think
engineering.
so. I think so. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Like, because I think there's almost two types of development we're talking about here. There's what you're talking about, like let's say safety critical systems that have to be well defined and have to be right. And then there's things that just want to get done quickly. So like, I don't know, a new like social media tool or like some new, I don't know, website builder, something like that, something that doesn't matter so much. And I think there's almost an obsession like with just getting stuff out quickly. Like it doesn't matter if it's garbage or not, just like get it released. And I think like I don't know if it's like an arms race with AI or what, but it just feels like even like the AI models themselves, like they come like there seems to be a new one out like every week, and I follow them quite closely. I think it's almost reaching a point. I know we always see like the benchmarks where it says, "Oh, this one's 10% better than last time," and like, but it kind of feels like they're getting to a bit of a point where they are just plateauing. Like a really interesting thing that I've found is that I create a lot of content on a stress testing called Gatling that I mentioned at the start. And so I'll go into the AI when I've got a problem on Gatling, and I'll be like, "How do I do it? How do this?" And then I can see my own article like coming back to me, like giving me, and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, what is it like sourcing this?" So it's only as good as the model that it's trained on. Like, and it's insane. And then I was watching like another video I think yesterday on since AI like over the last few months has been so prevalent, like the number of questions and answers on Stack Overflow, which AI ironically has changed on, have just plummeted so much. Like, because why would you go on there to be berated and like, for answering a certain thing when you can just ask AI? But then if we're getting to the point where everyone is just asking AI, like surely the amount of knowledge out there is going to go down and down. It's an interesting situation, I think.
Yeah, so that's the other side of it, isn't it? If you're going to try and do anything that's newish, so say you're using a new stack, you're using a new programming language, you're doing something that's genuinely never been done before, that data isn't in the training set the AI had. So it's not going to produce any outcome. It's not going to produce anything useful for you.
Exactly.
And if we stop producing, we stop writing new code, and we stop doing these new interesting things, there isn't going to be that training data for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you also mentioned in all that they're using it to prepare courses, though. So what courses are you building, James?
I've made quite a few courses on platforms. I mean, Udemy, I have a few courses on there. Some courses on Pluralsight, which is another platform, and a few other platforms as well. I've recently partnered with a company called Test Tribe. So again, my background is quite largely in test automation, and I'm building a course on there which is all about CI/CD for software testers. I think for me, it's a good course because I think I have a decent amount of experience in test automation, but also in the DevOps side of things, of which CI/CD is so important. So the course is basically aimed at testers, but it's to give them a background and an overview of CI/CD tools. So we explore quite a few of the different tools. We focus predominantly on GitHub Actions and Jenkins because I wanted to show two different tools side by side, one running locally, one in the cloud. And then we basically go through building out. I have an app that I've created for the course, which is like a full stack app with a back end in Golang, front end in Next.js. And then we basically go through adding in all of the unit testing, the API testing, the performance testing. We then work on deploying it to a staging environment live on the internet. We then run some post-deployment tests. We then run end-to-end tests, release verification tests. So all of the stuff that I've basically done for years in my job as a DevOps guy and a test automation guy, I've tried to distill at least like a decent amount of it in this course. It's been quite a lot of work, but yeah, we're getting there. So hopefully that should be released in a few weeks. I'm looking forward to sharing more about that soon.
Cool, that sounds very interesting. I saw a random post the other day where somebody was having a rant about how much they hate GitHub Actions. I was a bit surprised at that because I thought it's just a tool. I'm not really emotionally invested in it. It's fairly easy to use. Just do a bit of basic CI and run some automation on my tests.
Yeah,
Hadn't given it much thought. There's been an odd one that. How have you found it? Now you've built a course in it and obviously using it a bit more seriously than most people do.
Yeah, I mean, I used it a lot at SAP, to be honest. Although I think it's probably different using it in an enterprise, using it like for yourself. I didn't see the post that you're referring to, but I can imagine where it's going, like with in terms of like the runners, maybe that certain things run on. Like there's a lot of nuances, I guess, with GitHub Actions and what goes on behind the scenes. For me, I mean, I found it great. Like I found it really easy to use. I think the syntax of writing a pipeline is good. Um, it's very easy to get started. I haven't had any problems. I think the problems that I've had is using it, as I say, in a corporate environment where you can't just pull in every Docker image that you want, and you can't just, open up all the ports and do all of the weird stuff that we kind of like to do when we're working on indie projects. Maybe there's stuff around that, but yeah, for me, I found it really, really easy to use. I think having the CI tool where all of the code lives, which most people do use some form of GitHub or Git. If not that, then it's been really handy to just have it side by side. Like it's always made sense to use that tool.
So I have to admit, I have never used it in a corporate environment for CI/CD. We've used it for, this is Python code base, so I used it for doing things like learning Black, learning some static analysis, and just doing some basic checks before a branch was merged.
Yeah.
But never for our corporate CI/CD because, as you say, we couldn't pull in all that complexity. So we did a lot of that in code pipeline and code build on AWS. But I wrote on a comment last night about Slack being down overnight, for several hours last night.
Yeah.
And that a couple of comments on that highlighted that people depend on Slack for their critical workflows for their businesses. Their public SLA is best effort. That's it. And I made the comment as well that it's the same for GitHub. People depend on it. They don't have a particularly high SLA. So if you're trying to have like 3, 4, 5 nines, and you're using GitHub, you're using Slack, and you've got any of these in your automation, you're achieving 5 nines by luck, not through design, because you're depending on something that doesn't have an SLA, isn't guaranteed. So it's perhaps not the best thing to use in a corporate environment for different reasons.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the GitHub Actions that I used in the corporate, it would be like a self-hosted GitHub. So like for them, I guess they would argue that they have their own private license or private hosting of it, I guess. But I think your point is completely true. Like there are so many things that we depend on that, when they do go down, that have like that impact. Like Slack is a great one, GitHub's another one, like, and there's probably many more that we kind of forget until something goes wrong and then it goes down. But yeah, like I don't know, I found like guilding out the GitHub or using GitHub Actions like kind of for this course, like it's kind of obviously like when you're building a course for students, you want to use stuff that's open source or free to use. And so using GitHub's been great, but it has kind of reminded me, there is like a company behind this. Like if they suddenly said, you need to pay to use GitHub Actions, or, a little bit like what Docker tried to do like a few years ago and like the kind of storm that caused, it's just interesting to me. And I think that's why in the course I've tried to have GitHub as like the hosted one and then have a local open source one in Jenkins that you actually just run yourself on your own server, just so that you get exposure to that as well, and like the different ways that you can.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So how did you get into course creation? Because Pluralsight, Udemy, now this new company, that's quite a lot of stuff, but you've been doing this for 6 years, you said at the beginning?
I have, yes. Although I've only left my full-time role at SAP 2 or 3 months ago, I have been doing course creation, as you say, I think it's 5 or 6 years. The way that I got into it, to be honest, like I kind of got into it as something of a creative outlet. So, I mean, I would say that I've always had a decent passion for teaching, like for teaching concepts, whether it's about coding or likewise. And I've always enjoyed sharing knowledge, whether that's through blog posts or videos, etc. And I remember when I was learning another tool, there was a tool like an API test automation framework called Rest Assured. And I remember learning that as part of my job at SAP. And while I was doing it, I was like, there isn't, an awful lot of content out about this. I had to go through a lot of hurdles to get things working. And I was like, let me just create like a really basic video, a really basic course on Udemy that just talks about how to set up Rest Assured, how to write a basic test. And I was like, I'll release it for free. Like, I doubt anyone will be interested. I released it, I think, on Boxing Day in the UK, which is the day after Christmas Day. Didn't think anything of it, and like just like left it. And then I came back like 2 days later, and I don't know why, but it had like, I think something ridiculous, like 5,000 people had registered for it. I don't know if it's just because it was a free course and people were like, oh, cool, it's free, I'll just register and never take it. But it really showed me that people are interested in seeing content on, particularly on technical things. Like, you can go and read the documentation, you can go through AI, but I know for me, there's nothing like just actually sitting down and watching a video with someone doing it. Like, there's something, I don't know if it's like a confidence thing or what it is, but there's just something about being able to just watch a video and go through it with someone. It kind of feels like you have that guidance. One thing that I found really interesting, and I don't know if other course creators can relate to this, but if I make a course and then in a few years I need to install that same tool and use it again, I will go back and watch my own course and like be like go through that with myself. Like, really, it's like really weird, but it's so reassuring to say, oh yeah, I can go through it. And even if it's out of date, like, you just kind of get that confidence to start. I think it's all just about, yeah, like being able to start and get going and get moving. So yeah, I don't know, like, there's other ways to learn. Obviously, like, yeah, you can read the documentation, etc. That probably is more efficient, a lot quicker. But I think particularly for learning a new concept that you're not at all familiar with, I think there's nothing like just going through an actual course. I think that's very good to get you started, and then you can go off and explore and, implement whatever your use case is, etc. But in terms of just going through something, getting it installed, getting it moving, that's certainly like the kind of feedback that I've had from my courses. But anyway, like, yeah, just starting with like a basic one or something that I thought was totally niche, that was totally not going to be interesting at all. That kind of made me think, oh, maybe I could do this a bit more and do this a bit more. And then maybe I can start charging a few dollars like for the course as well. And then, it kind of like snowballed from there, really. Creating courses, yeah, on platforms and then onto like YouTube. Yeah, like it's been really good for me, like in terms of my growth. Like, it's a little bit like, I guess you can relate to this as well, like writing like a newsletter or writing a book. Like, when you take that time to actually share what you're learning, you maybe think that you know something, but then when you try to write it down or you try to actually teach it to someone, you realize, actually, I don't know if I do like completely know what I'm talking about here. I know it's in here somewhere, but actually getting it out of your head, whether that's into a course, a book, a newsletter, like, that's where the learning really cements for you as the content creator as well. So it's kind of like a win-win in that sense. If you want to become an expert in the topic, that was another thing that helped me to start with course creation, but to continue with it as well. Once I realized that I was actually learning more and more about what it was that I was teaching.
Yeah, it's an awesome way to learn, isn't it? Just trying to explain to somebody else what you're doing or teach someone else. It shows you there's gaps in your own knowledge. Yeah. Helps you clarify your thinking and really think about, how does this work? What does that do? And as you say, it's such a great way to learn. Even, I'm now doing the third version of my Coding Challenges course in Redis, and I'm learning just as much from each one as students are, I'm sure. Yeah. And there are other things that I've taught for decades now for software engineers that work for me. Every time I do it, I get as much out of mentoring, coaching, teaching them as I'm sure they do.
Absolutely.
So, quick question occurred to me there about courses. It's very easy to go on to Google or go on to LinkedIn or other social media and see all these people going, well, build a following, build a course, profit, make your fortune. You'll be making 6-7 figures, and anyone can do it.
Yeah.
So, without getting too personal, what's the reality been for you? How's the experience been? Is it nice beer money, or are you planning to buy that private jet? Somewhere in between.
I'd like to say it was somewhere in between, but maybe I don't know if it's even that, to be honest. I think it's definitely not overnight like success. It's not what you get sold. Like, there's so much content out there that tells you, yes, just follow this framework, like you say, build a following, sell it, you'll make loads of money. It really isn't like that, in my experience. Maybe it is for some people, but in my experience, it really isn't. You have to take your time with it, from the sense that you have to have some knowledge to sell, or something to create a course on. Like, in the days of which we're in now, where you can literally type into a prompt, write me a course about this, and that just doesn't cut it, unfortunately. Because if it's that easy to do for you, anyone can do that now. So what you really need to have, I think, is that experience. And the way that you get that experience is just through time. You don't have to work for big tech or a big company. It can just be through building side projects, but you still have to invest that time. The idea of get rich quick schemes, they don't work. They really don't. It's if you could just get rich doing this stuff easily without having the fundamental building blocks or the fundamental knowledge behind you, then everyone would just do it. I know it just doesn't really work like that. For me, it's been steady income. I would say it's more closer towards beer money rather than quitting your job. I am trying to do it full time now, but it really is a full-time job. There's a lot of work that goes into it. Not so much the recording, but the planning and structuring of a course. In terms of the scripts that you have to write, the code base that you have to writing it in a way that builds upon the last module and the last lecture. There's so many different areas to it. Another thing that I'm finding as well, and this is from talking to a lot of other course creators, is that a lot of people are making awesome courses, technical, very, very valuable, but actually marketing them, getting people interested, getting people to involve, that is actually the really hard part. And I think, again, we're in a space where there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of people promising this and that, and there's a lot of consumers have got a lot of choice, let's say, from what to choose. So actually getting your course to be popular enough to actually make proper money, that's probably where the hardest part is at the moment. I see that a lot of course creators are struggling with. But yeah, for me, working, because I've seen behind the scenes on a few platforms like Pluralsight, for example. So Pluralsight, for those that don't know, it's a platform where you register. So there's Udemy, which is a marketplace. So Udemy is a platform where anyone can upload a course. Anyone could just upload a course tomorrow and try and sell it for whatever price. Whereas Pluralsight is a library of courses. So you buy the membership for Pluralsight and you get access to all of the courses. And having been an author on there and on Udemy for a few years, I've seen how those platforms are not struggling, but there's so much competition now. There's so many different options, whether that's free videos on YouTube, whether that's other platforms like Skillshare, etc. There's so much competition in this space. And I think that's really again, more and more people are able to share content now, which is great, and get their ideas out there. But I think it's becoming a harder and harder field to stand out in. Yeah,
it's getting a bit dated now. But the meme 20 years ago when I started my first business was, "If you build it, they will come," from the Kevin Costner Field of Dreams film. And I met so many people. I'm going to build a website. I'm going to do this business, and I'm going to build. And I was, who's going to come? How are they going to come? How are they going to know where you are if you haven't told them?
Yeah.
No. Build. Look, got to do some marketing, and that's not easy. Yeah. That's a whole different skill set. And you can have the most amazing course, product, website, whatever, but if no one knows it's there, you're not going to get.
I think that's where software engineers, where it is, obviously you can't generalize too much, but a lot. I know that I'm like this as a software engineer. I like to just code, just get my head down and just don't care about requirements, don't care about marketing, anything like that. I'll just build something amazing and then worry about marketing it later. And it's that's probably not going to end well. That's where the marketing, like you say, is really like the hard bit, and it's possibly the area where certainly like a lot of great engineers that I know they have a bit of a skill gap in that. Like it's very rare to find, in my experience, an incredible engineer that's also incredible at marketing as well. Like having that kind of joint skill set is is quite rare, and like if you have that, then yeah, you can
it's
do
quite
anything.
unique. And the reason I focus so much on it was, let's say, when I started my first business 20 odd years ago, I saw so many people who had been made redundant, reached that point in lives, maybe got decent redundancy payout, and some of them were getting 50, 60k redundancy payouts. Would come along to my business and say, build us some software, build us this website, going to do this. And quite a few of the times I turned them down and then met them a few months later. And I'm working for a job, burned through all my money, didn't get a single customer.
Yeah.
And the reason we turned them down is we were saying, well, who's going to buy that? What is it? We don't want to be just taking your money. And they'd burn through their money. They'd have either struggled to launch because they weren't focused enough on launching, or they built something and it was great, but they hadn't validated that actually anyone wanted it. They'd asked a few friendly people who went, yeah, cool idea, but you don't want to ask friendly people. You want to ask a random stranger. And you don't want to know, would you buy it? You want to know, will you give me some money now? Because if somebody gets out their wallet and will give you the money, you've got something people genuinely want. Other than that, you haven't got validation. So
exactly, I think that's so important. My wife has taught me a lot on this. So my wife works in UX, which is like user experience, and she says it's all about research, doing user research, like finding out what the user wants, finding out what the customer wants. Like we might have an idea of what we think they want, but that's our idea. Like there's going to be a big difference between what we build and what the customer actually wants. And I think it's a mistake to build something first and then worry about convincing the customer later. It's much better to go the other way around, to go to the customer, to talk to them, find out what it is that they're struggling with, what their problems are, what it is that they actually want, like what their pain point is and what it is that we can actually solve. Whereas I think it's, like I say, it's very easy for us to think, make this product, it will be great, and then people will just buy it. Like these, I think particularly, like I think it's always been true, but I think even more so, like these days, like it's even more important to do that work up front. Like
especially as builders, because it's so easy to fall into that. So my personal example of this was I built a bed and breakfast search engine in 2002, so way before Airbnb. Built a big bed and breakfast website. We ended up doing fairly well in the end, but when we first built it, I was like, we must have these features. I'm contracting in IT. I'm staying away from home in bed and breakfast. I want a better search for B&B near this tube station, near this motorway junction.
Yeah.
And maybe in this town. So we built a search engine that could do near certain motorway junctions, near train station, near tube station. Put a lot of effort into all this technology. I was the only person that ever used that search facility. We had millions of visitors to that website. Now, fortunately, we survived long enough that it didn't matter, but 80% of our development costs went into those features that I insisted we needed to stand out.
Yeah.
It was only ever me that used it, because it turns out everybody just goes to the search and goes, bed and breakfast near town name.
Yeah.
Come to a page with that, they pick one, they go about it. They don't care, they don't look for the other features. So no one apart from me used that, and it was 80% of our effort.
Wow. That's incredible. But I imagine that story is so common with so many businesses and people. Like, I bet you must have really learned that the hard way. Right?
So I try to validate everything now and stick to it. But
yeah,
some lessons you've got to learn the hard way, unfortunately.
Yeah,
and it's so tempting, isn't it, as builders that build stuff.
Yeah, of course it is. That's the fun bit, right? I think there's like a tendency to try and avoid the most difficult bit, and the most difficult bit often is just like having the conversation with the clients or doing the user research, or possibly hearing stuff that you don't want to hear, right? Like being told, oh yeah, I want this. Well, no, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound like fun to build. But yeah, it's hard. Like I'm not saying that I'm good at any of that. Like I still definitely fall into the trap of building too much, but I'm trying to fight against that actively, trying to engage more with users, trying to work out what the problem is before I actually start building stuff. I think like just tying it back to course creation bits. Like my new course is like built for a client essentially, but when I plan to launch courses in the future, I think it's very important to have a sign up list first. So just get like some people at least like registered on a list, but validate like your idea first before you actually build something. Because creating a course can take like months, like literally. And there's nothing more like I've kind of experienced this, but there's nothing more demoralizing than spending months on building something, like you said, and then no one takes it and no one uses it. So like even if you just build a very simple landing page, give an idea of what the course is going to be. It's going to be ready by this date. If you're interested, register here, and then at least you've got some validation straight away. And if no one signs up, then great. Then you can move on to doing a different project instead.
Yeah, taking that one step further, I prefer that they gave you money, or you got some validation
Yes.
to give you money. Because again,
exactly.
that's real. But if you don't want to take money, I quite like what I believe Buffer did in theirs. And they put up the landing page. They took you through the checkout. You hit buy now, and it went on and onto a page after having you filled in your details. They say, thank you, but we're not quite ready to take your credit card details. We'll get in touch when we're ready. So they had
Cool.
that confirmation that somebody clicked the buy, they filled in the details.
Nice. That's a great idea.
Without actually taking the money, and then if it didn't work, or if they didn't manage to fulfill it, they hadn't taken anyone's money, they didn't have to go back and apologise.
That's really cool. Because like on that point, like it's very easy, like you say, to just ask for an email and just for a sign up. But there's one thing like people putting in their email for free, and there's another like actually handing over cash or putting in the credit card, etc. And I think like just getting a bunch of emails might give you a false sense of optimism that whatever you're building is great. Like, don't get me wrong, of course it's better than not having the emails, but yeah, that only goes like so far. That's super interesting. Another really interesting thing that I saw is that a mistake that I think people do make is having like a free version of whatever it is you're offering first and then trying to transition it to paid later on. It's like, I think like you just said, like it's much more important to get them to pay up front. Even if you get way less people, you'll find that the people that are paying the money are the ones that you want to have on board. You don't really just want people that are only there because it's free and they're just trying to, get what they can from it. If your goal is to make money anyway.
Yeah, and to validate what you said about the waitlist, I have some waitlists for a couple of my courses.
Cool.
My typical experience is that 10% of that waitlist will buy. So that gives you a very different impression.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to put down and go, 500 people on the waitlist, that's great. I'll launch it and I'll have 500 sales. That's a very different experience. That you'll launch it and I'll get 40 to 50.
Yeah.
You can make very different judgment calls if you set that expectation.
Yeah.
And I think it was Zach Wilson recently posted on LinkedIn that he put a course for free on YouTube.
Okay.
And 15,000, if I remember rightly, people took it, but only around 20 finished it.
Yeah.
So that's the other interesting thing. You've got to see that. What's the drop-off level going to be? How many people are going to follow through?
I've seen that. Like I've seen a lot of analytics. Obviously, I've created, I think, coming up to like 10 courses or so now. And all of the platforms, like they give you a very good insight into the completion rate and like the completion rate for every single course. It doesn't matter how good the course is. Some of them vary, of course, but it generally is like very few people actually complete a course. You get a lot taking the first couple of lectures, and then every lecture it goes down, down, down. So yeah, like I don't know what the lesson is from there, but yeah, course completion rates are very different. You can't expect the majority of students to complete the course for whatever reason.
I found that a total shock. As somebody who has, up until very recently, had finished every book I've ever picked up, has finished every course I've ever signed up for.
Yeah.
I found that amazing. And this is a habit I've had to break myself out of recently, because I read a lot of books and I'm surrounded by books at the moment, despite my wife making me get rid of a lot that I haven't touched for years. It's been a really hard habit for me to break, because I'm a bookworm. But if I bought a book, I would read that book.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a hard thing for me to train myself now to actually, I don't have time to read them all. I'm getting grey hair now. I'm getting old. Life's short. I'm not going to be able to read every single book in the world. I have to now actually start being a bit more strict with my time and cherry pick. And I found that actually so hard. So I find it very strange when people sign up for a course and don't take it.
Yeah.
and don't
Yeah.
follow through on it. It's a bizarre
Yeah.
one. But you're right, and
It's
I think
it is what people are like the number of courses that I've like again I look at my stats, particularly on Udemy, the number of people that have signed up and never opened the course is like honestly, it really is crazy. It's a really large percentage.
yeah, I think the founder of Udemy went on to found Maven and
Mm,
talked about the course completion rates, and that's why Maven was then cohort courses. So
mm,
you've got
mm,
that live
mm.
audience and you've got that
Yeah.
live thing, so people are more likely to attend. Even then, I've spoken to people who are teaching on Maven, and again, the the attendance and the completion rates are still very low, and we're
Are they
talking about
really
higher
interesting?
ticket courses there.
Yeah. I would have thought with a cohort it would encourage more, but yeah, that's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. I've thought so too, and particularly when you look at some of those courses of $500 to
Yeah.
$5,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
A
when people
premium.
aren't completing them, it's a strange one.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned SAP a few times,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about testing. It'd be really interesting to hear how, because I think you started as a tester, you spent many years in testing and worked at test management, then pivoted, shall I say, quite late in your career to being more of a software engineer.
Mm.
How did that come about, James?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I'm going to be totally frank and honest, like when I did computer science at university and when I left and when I thought it was time to get a job, I didn't think I was good enough to be a developer. And I thought I want to work in computing, in programming, but I was like, I just don't feel confident becoming a developer. I don't know why. Like it was a different world then. Like even Google wasn't, it was maybe only just launching or certainly no AI or anything like that. And I just felt for whatever reason, I'm not good enough to be in a software engineer or a developer, but I want to be in computing, in programming. So I thought, okay, I'll do testing, and that'll be like so much. It'll be so much easier to just test people's code that they can write the code, and I'll just test it. It actually turns out that that's probably the complete opposite. It's actually a lot harder to test, at least to test well people's code, than it is to be an engineering. But that was how I started. So I actually started as a video game tester. I used to work for EA, if you've heard of them, EA Sports, so FIFA, Burnout, those sort of games. And I remember when I joined that company, I was like, amazing, like this is the dream job. Like I love video games, who doesn't? And I was like, great, I'm just going to be playing games all day and this is going to be super fun. I'll just do this for the rest of my life. And then like even just after a few months I was like, oh my goodness, this is so difficult. Like because you're not just going on and playing games, you're playing the same level of Harry Potter over and over and over again, trying to find bugs, trying to recreate bugs. Yeah, so that was just like an absolute nightmare. So I left that job and then got into more test automation, performance testing roles. And again, like under the premise that I'm not good enough to write code, but I could probably write code that tests other code, like automation code. And I don't know, it just kind of felt like there was a disconnect. It felt like the code that I was writing, because it was only test code, I couldn't break anything in production. Like the code that I'm writing is not actually going to get used by an end user. So I felt, whether that's a psychological thing, I felt like a bit safer writing that kind of code. But again, like over time, like realizing writing lots of performance test scripts, writing lots of test automation, I kind of realized, hey, I am just writing code. It's just a different type of code. And then I got to the point where I was like, actually, I think I would much rather. I should have, I studied to be a software engineer. I was like, and I actually realized that I could do it. Basically, that I didn't need to have this weird blocker about not being good enough to be a developer. So anyway, I was at SAP and been there for a few years working as a tester. And again, although I joined as an automation tester, I was doing a lot of manual work, a lot of manual release verification. And then a job came up for a software engineering role in a team nearby to mine. So SAP is quite a big company. There's a lot of different areas that you can go into. And like companies generally like to recruit from within, like to do like a pivot, etc. So I joined a team in there and didn't really look back. Like for me, like actually having that background in testing, I actually realized was a huge help. Like I already had some coding experience and knowledge from writing automation, performance code, and also from looking at a lot of code bases. Like you actually really get to know a code base when you have to test it, when you have to, ensure code coverage, all of the metrics, etc. And so, yeah, like that was my story. Like for me, I thought that was the common path, like people that wanted to get in development but just wanted to get their foot in the door would go as testers and then try and move into development. So it was interesting for you to say that people move the other way. Although I can see, although now that you've mentioned it, I do know a lot of developers that have moved into testing roles, whether that's automation or, like DevOps bits and pieces. But yeah, that was how I kind of got through to it. But I've always kept a lot of that automation performance background. I think, in like the courses that I create and the work that I've done since. But I think for me, like it served me quite well because I feel like I have a decent amount of exposure and background to a lot of different disciplines of testing. And of course, testing is fundamental part of software development. Like good testing is like absolutely critical for all aspects, whether that's unit, API, end to end, every other type of test. So yeah, like it's worked well for me. Like I think having that journey, but I'm interested to try and share more of that with others because I think I probably can't be the only person that feels that they're not good enough to be a software engineer. And I don't know. Hopefully, maybe my background can encourage others to think, oh, actually, it's not that different to testing, or testing's actually probably harder anyway.
Well, let's hope it can encourage more people. I think it's probably a good path as well because a lot of software engineers don't put enough emphasis on testing. They don't value it enough, and they don't have enough experience and skill set. And because of all those reasons, and they fear doing it, so they don't then do enough of it to actually gain the skills. So it's probably a really useful skill set to have, and
Yeah.
very transferable and a great start. So you've also mentioned SAP a few times there. They're a fairly sort of big, well-known tech company. We don't have that many of those in the UK, and we don't hear much about people working for these big tech companies in the UK. What was your experience working for them in the UK? How was it?
Yeah, I mean, it was great, to be honest. Like I spent, I think, almost 10 years or so there. Had nothing but a good experience. So, I mean, I actually joined a smaller part of SAP called Concur. So Concur is a travel and expense company. They were acquired by SAP, I think, at the sort of time that I joined. So I did predominantly work with Concur, although Concur was integrated into SAP and becomes part of the whole umbrella. But yeah, the experience is it's very interesting in big tech. Like I would say I certainly learned a lot from being exposed to a lot of great engineers and a lot of good code, a lot of good practices, whether that's around agile, DevOps, etc., which was very good. In terms of like how I would compare it, like I'm fortunate in that I've worked for big tech and I've also worked for a lot of smaller startups as well, where you go very, very fast and there's no constraints and restrictions, and it's a little bit like the Wild West. And like yeah, there's a balance. Like I would say, like in big tech, it depends on what your mindset is as a developer. Like some people do just want to go fast and break things, whereas others people like to follow a very tried and true tested path. And I would say at big tech, like it can be hard to stand out. Maybe if you want to just go into a job and just code and just be quiet and just be kept, almost just doing your job, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like big tech might then work, but if you want to actually make changes, do things, like there's a lot of constrictions in place. Like it was interesting because I mean Concur started as very much as a startup, and it was a very small company that grew quickly, was acquired by SAP, and even when it was acquired, like they tried to keep the startup feel, and they did for a long time, but eventually SAP brought Concur around to their way of doing things, which is everything has to go through a process, everything has to be strict quality gates, lots of release management, etc. And I think that was quite a hard shift for a lot of the developers that had been there from the startup days, who were used to doing, basically not doing what they wanted, but, just having like that freedom to do their job, being able to, log on to production servers and make changes if they needed to. Whereas SAP would try to implement like zero touch on deployments, not having any access to anything that people didn't need to, which is the right thing, but because it had been built in like a startup way where there's certain bits code here and there, and only certain people know how to do these things. Like that was quite a challenge for people to migrate to. But yeah, like, I mean, I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. I think there are some like big tech in the UK, but it isn't like, yeah, you're right. It isn't like Silicon Valley sort of place. I mean, where I am now, like in Reading, which is like near, you could say like the Thames Valley corridor is like our Silicon Valley, although it's not really quite the same as it is in the US. But yeah, no, it was a good experience for me.
But going back 20, 25 years ago, we talked about Reading as being a kind of our Silicon Valley. There was Oracle, there was Microsoft,
Yeah,
a couple of other big companies, all in that row that you'd see from the train line as you went into London. And it was where the big tech companies in the UK at the time were. So it's interesting what you said there, that if you want to sit somewhere and just code and just do your job, which sounds awful to me. I like learning things. I like being involved in all parts of it. I like doing that marketing, and I like that at a startup I spent the morning configuring EggDrop to do an IRC channel, the afternoon stuffing envelopes, and the evening dealing with a production issue. And then I might have written C, C++, PHP, and a bit of JavaScript all on the same day. And I like that. I wouldn't say chaos, but exposure to all parts of it. So I can't think of anything worse. But when it's very easy to go on social media and see big tech is a dream. You do all these interesting things, but it kind of sounds a bit different from what you talk about there. It's more you're going to do very mundane stuff, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. Definitely is. Like, my experience was the opposite to like what you described there in terms of doing 4 different things. Like, you would maybe do different things, but you would very much be, this is the code base you're working on. It's, JavaScript. It's got this SQL backend. That's all you're doing. Like, and don't change too much because it will impact all of the other like systems along. And like for some people are happy with that. Like, some people don't like. Some people do still, even now, like not so much these days, but maybe like 10, 15 years ago, people were happy to just focus on one language or one or two texts. Some people would find it stressful being exposed to think, oh no, another language to learn, another new technology. I think that's kind of gone away a lot now, particularly with, it's easier to learn new techs now, and you can't really make do with just being a specialist in one thing anymore. And I think, again, I think that's where a lot of the engineers at SAP did get frustrated, in that, people want to be learning that now, particularly now, like as we move into modern times, like it's people want to be exposed to more, to be doing more, trying out more different things. And when you are just like constrained to one code base, then that isn't going to be a happy marriage for a lot of people. But for some people, like, they were quite happy just doing the same thing. But I think over time, like less and less so, particularly for more and more as the more junior people come in. So as more of like the junior engineers come in, they would have big ideas on what they wanted to do. And then, a lot of them struggled because they would find, oh man, I can't log into here, or I can't use my library that I want to use for this. Like, I have to use this one. So you are given a lot of constraints. And another thing with, particularly like a company like SAP, is that everything is about compliance and security. So going back a bit again to like the GitHub Actions that we were talking about, like, you can't just run a particular Docker image. Like, you have to use the SAP Docker image that has the exact version of Java, that has no vulnerabilities, that, maybe it's not out of date and doesn't play nicely with another framework, etc. But this is the only one that you can use. You can't try different things. You have to use what we give you. And a lot of developers struggle with that. Like, they don't think that's the best way to do it. They feel like there's something better out there. So it depends on the personality of the developer, like whether it works well or not.
In many ways, SAP sounds just like any other big enterprise there. And that you're going to be very constrained. There's going to be a lot of legacy tech, and you're going to be working on versions of things that are old but stable and known, and you're not going to change too much because it works. There isn't the value in changing it.
Exactly.
And when I see the enthusiasm for a lot of people going, oh, we should rewrite everything in Rust, Yeah, Rust is cool. I like Rust, but it's just not going to happen. It doesn't matter whether Rust is better. There's not going to be the business case. There's not going to be the time and the effort and the availability of
That's it.
any of those to enable us to rewrite everything in that. Which brings us a full circle back to my other point, my final point, AI, that I forgot earlier. SAP are a great example of this. SAP said they're not going to hire any more software engineers. I don't believe that, considering the website is full of adverts for software engineers. But I also struggle at, and again, another reason I'm skeptical on it is, let's say that we believe that AI will make a software engineer 30% more productive. Software engineers are expensive because we get a great return on what we do. You know, the leverage you can create is massive. I have never worked at a company that could do even half the projects that they wanted to because they didn't have enough software engineers. They either couldn't find them or they didn't have enough budget for them. So I don't understand this logic of it's going to make them 30% more productive, so we cut the workforce so we won't hire them. Given that for most people the constraint has always been having enough people to do the projects, why wouldn't you hire more people? Why wouldn't you keep the same people and leverage that 30% to do more, to take on more of the projects? So again, if AI works as well as if claimed, I see again it being a boom at some point in the future, because when people are less cautious and financially they are now, we'll come back to all those projects that everyone wanted to do and never had enough people for, and we'll go, right, we can do them now, so we can hire again. And if AI makes us more productive, we'll do more of them because we can be more productive.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's a very interesting stat that I saw the other day. I think as developers, we maybe live in something of an echo chamber with AI, and feel like, it's coming to take everyone's jobs and like the end is nigh, etc. If you look at all of the companies, like it feels like in every tech company you go on is AI this, AI that. But if you look at all of the companies, it's only something like, I can't remember the exact number, but like 4 or 5% that are actually using AI so far. So you take like a lot of government sites or government projects or local businesses, like most people aren't using this stuff at all. And what will happen is that it will grow, AI will become more and more popular, but it will need software engineers to implement those things for these businesses. Like it's the software engineers that will know how to use it. Like even now, like the new Claude that was released, I think yesterday, which is amazing, can write great code, but it still needs an engineer to go in and be able to prompt it to know what to ask for, to how to build, and how to then, like, tying back to your earlier point about the requirements. Like, it's all very well like churning out lots and lots of code and doing stuff, but if it doesn't match the requirements, if it doesn't match what the user wants, then there's no value in it. Like, and it's just going to become, you're still going to need the engineers to like take that code and then, to run with it and to maintain it. And then like and the other thing is just like, once you're releasing all of these things into production, are you really going to rely on AI to maintain it for you, to deal with customer support queries, to deal with new requirements, changes, updates? Like, you're going to need more and more engineers to do that eventually. I think a lot of like maybe the redundancies and what's going on in the tech market, I feel like AI is maybe like partly a factor, no doubt, but I think there are other factors as well. And I think it's very easy to forget that and to make AI the scapegoat for everything. Like, I think there's a lot more going on in the world, like in terms of changes, that, it can't just be AI. Like, I think AI is sometimes a convenient excuse. But
Or a way of putting a positive spin on it. So rather than saying, we're uncertain, we're not sure how to get the return, cash is more expensive these days, so we're laying people off to try and kind of refocus. And I mean, laying people off is a failure, let's admit it. If you're running a company and you have to lay off 30% of your workforce, you have failed, you have messed up.
Yeah.
You have deployed your capital badly. So instead of saying, I messed up, I can't deploy your capital well, sorry, Mr. Investor, you can say, oh, AI, we're refocusing positive. So it's a far better marketing message to the market and to investors, isn't it? We're capitalizing on AI. We're doing new great stuff. We're following the trend, rather than we deployed your capital badly. We suck. You should find a better management team. Which no one's going to say, are they?
No, of course not. Of course. That's it. Like, yeah, it's so many factors at play, whether it's political or what. But it's interesting. I guess time will tell. Like for me, like I still think it's an incredible tool, like to be used. But the idea of it replacing software engineers for me is laughable. But maybe I'll be proved completely wrong. Who knows? I think if it gets to the stage where it can completely replace software engineers, like there's many other industries that will be severely impacted. So we'll have a completely different world to contend with them. But we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think it will. It's been great talking, James. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences.
Yeah, pleasure.
Where can people find you? Where should people look for you for get in contact and explore some of the ideas? Or in 5 years' time, tell you write a log about AI?
Yeah, please do come and tell me. Yeah, probably LinkedIn is probably the easiest at the moment. Either LinkedIn or YouTube. So YouTube, you should be able to find me just from searching my name, James Willett. Same on LinkedIn. Those are the best places at the moment. I'm still in the process of building a new website, which is coming along slowly.
All right, cool. And we'll put all those links in the show notes. Thank you very much, James. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks very much.